the defining aroma of our new life, the one I had yearned for through 2 decades of stale office air, and the metallic tang of ambition, was the scent of my wife's joy. It smelled of melting Belgian chocolate, of slow fermenting sourdough, and of the sweet alchemy of butter and sugar caramelizing in a hot oven. We had invested everything, our savings, my retirement portfolio, our hopes, into this house in the serenely manicured community of Oakmont Hills. We weren't seduced by the 3-car garages or the cathedral ceilings. We were seduced by the kitchen. It was a vast, light-filled space with a Vulcan range, a walk-in pantry, and a sprawling marble island that was less a piece of furniture and more a stage. Here, after years of dreaming in the confines of a tiny city galley, my wife Sarah could finally give life to her lifelong passion, her own artisanal bakery, which she christened the Gilded Spoon. My own dream was far simpler: to become a supporting character in her story. I was Tom Vance, and after 20 years as a senior strategist on Capitol Hill, a life spent in the shadows of powerful men, whispering advice and navigating crises, I was content to fade into blissful obscurity. My new purpose was to be the chief procurement officer of flour, the head of quality control for all things chocolate, and the unwavering champion of the most gifted pastry chef I knew. We sought a quiet existence, a life measured in the satisfaction of a perfect croissant, a community built one shared pastry at a time. This idyllic vision was shattered on a Saturday morning, as the scent of Sarah's cardamom-laced morning buns wafted through the open kitchen window. A series of sharp, peremptory knocks echoed from the front door. I opened it to a woman who appeared to have been constructed from the same rigid blueprint as the neighborhood itself. Her blonde bob was a marvel of engineering. Her beige pantsuit was devoid of a single wrinkle, and her eyes, the color of faded slate, were conducting a swift and brutal audit of our front porch. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was polished and bright, but it had the chilly undertone of a threat veiled in politeness, a tone I had heard countless times in depositions and closed-door meetings. "I am Barbara Jenkins. I serve as president of the Oakmont Hills Homeowners Association." "Tom Vance," I replied, extending a hand that she met with a brief, firm, and entirely passionless shake. "A pleasure. My wife, Sarah, and I are still settling in." "So I've gathered," she said. Her gaze drifted past me into the house, and her nostrils flared, as if sampling a questionable wine. "The entire community has been made aware of your presence." She inhaled again, and a look of profound, almost theatrical displeasure tightened her features. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. The emissions from your property." I was genuinely baffled. Emissions? We just had the HVAC system inspected. "I am referring to the odors," she clarified, her voice dripping with condescension. "Yesterday it was a rather aggressive yeasty smell. Today it's cinnamon. I believe it's quite overpowering. Article 9. Section C of our bylaws expressly forbids any activity which creates a persistent and disruptive nuisance, and that includes olfactory disturbances that infringe upon a neighbor's right to the quiet enjoyment of their property." I stood there, momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated pettiness of the complaint. Sarah, drawn by our voices, appeared beside me, a smudge of flour on her cheek, and a smile of pure, unalloyed warmth on her face. "Hello, I'm Sarah," she said, her voice as sweet as the buns in the oven. "Is everything okay?" "This is Mrs. Jenkins, the HOA president," I said, my voice carefully stripped of emotion. "She has concerns about the smell of your baking." Sarah's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wounded confusion. "Oh, I am so terribly sorry. I had no idea. I can certainly close the kitchen window." Her innate kindness immediately took over. "Actually, a batch just came out. They're best when they're warm. Please, let me get you one." Barbara held up a hand, stopping her mid-turn. The gesture was both a negation and a judgment. "Thank you. But that will not be necessary. I am not here for a pastry. Mrs. Vance, I am here to issue an official warning regarding a bylaw violation. I suggest you find a way to mitigate your activities." She glanced around, her eyes lingering for a moment on Sarah's professional-grade standing mixer, visible from the doorway. A strange, fleeting expression crossed her face, not just disapproval, but a flicker of something sharp, something that looked almost like bitter recognition. "The food business is a difficult one," she said, her voice taking on a new, knowing edge. "Most people simply don't have the temperament for it." With that pronouncement, she turned and marched down our walkway. A soldier of suburban conformity who had successfully repelled an invasion of pleasant smells. I closed the door and turned to Sarah, who was struggling to process the encounter. "Are we in trouble?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "You were creating joy. She's just a woman who has forgotten what that smells like." But as I held my wife, I felt a familiar, unwelcome chill. I recognized Barbara's type. In the world I had just left, they were the staffers who derived their power not from accomplishment, but from obstruction. They were gatekeepers of misery. I had managed them, outmaneuvered them, and occasionally crushed them. I had hoped, naively, that I had left that world behind for good. But it seemed a new, hyper-local version of the game had just found its way to my front door. Our attempt to placate Barbara by keeping the windows closed and running our kitchen's powerful ventilation fan only seemed to embolden her. The official campaign of harassment began a week later, after Sarah launched the online face of her dream, a simple, elegant Facebook page for the Gilded Spoon, showcasing her creations with luminous photography. The page was an instant hit, drawing praise and, more importantly, orders from the surrounding towns. We were meticulous, instituting a strict, by-appointment-only pickup system to ensure no more than one car was ever at our house at a time. We were a model of discretion, but to Barbara, discretion was not the issue. Existence was. The first notice arrived in a heavy, cream-colored envelope that felt more like an indictment than a letter. Citing Article 12. Section A, Prohibition of Commercial Enterprise. It declared Sarah's state-licensed and fully legal cottage food business to be a violation of the community's residential-only zoning. It came with a $200 fine and a threat of escalating penalties. "But this is my home," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she read the letter. The joy of her first week of successful orders was draining from her face, replaced by a fearful anxiety. The state created these cottage food laws, so people like me could do this. "The state doesn't live across the street," I said grimly, "and it doesn't chair the Architectural Review Board." My professional instincts screamed for a swift, overwhelming counterattack. I could have had our lawyer drown the HOA in jurisdictional challenges and threats of a countersuit for tortious interference. But I held back, clinging to the fading hope of a peaceful resolution. I wrote a polite, deferential letter to the board, explaining the cottage food laws, outlining our non-disruptive business model, and reaffirming our desire to be good neighbors. The response was a second fine for $400, with a curt, handwritten note from Barbara at the bottom. "The covenants are not negotiable." It was then that I truly understood her motivation. This wasn't about the rules. This was about her. I did a little digging, the kind of casual background check that was second nature to me. It didn't take long to uncover the story. 5 years earlier, Barbara's Bistro, a small cafe in a neighboring town, had closed after less than a year in business, drowning in debt and scathing reviews that criticized its uninspired food and dour atmosphere. Sarah wasn't just a nuisance to her. She was a living, breathing, and successful embodiment of Barbara's own failed dream. The Gilded Spoon's success was a personal insult, and Barbara was determined to see it fail. This knowledge changed everything. I wasn't dealing with a mere stickler. I was dealing with a deeply insecure woman whose only remaining business was the business of making others miserable. That evening, I observed her through my study window. She was in her own kitchen, a showpiece of granite and dark wood that, from what I could see, was utterly lifeless. Her husband sat at the table, engrossed in his laptop, barely grunting in response to something she said. Barbara stood alone, staring out the window, her posture rigid, her expression a mask of profound loneliness. She wasn't a monster. She was just a profoundly unhappy person. But her unhappiness was becoming a direct threat to my family. The fines became a regular occurrence, each one more ludicrous than the last. We were fined for unauthorized temporary signage for a small, tasteful welcome mat. We were fined for a customer's tire touching the grass verge for a few seconds. I paid them all, documenting each one in a growing digital file on my laptop, a grim accounting of her escalating obsession. My old life, the one I was so desperate to escape, began to seep into our quiet home. I found myself on the phone with Marcus, my former deputy, and now the chief of staff for Senator Brighton. "You sound like you're running a campaign, Tom," he said after I'd spent 5 minutes detailing my documentation strategy. "It feels like one," I admitted. "My opponent is ruthless, has a solid ground game with the locals, and is completely immune to facts and logic." "Sounds like half the people we dealt with," he laughed. "Seriously, though, be careful. I've seen good people get dragged into the mud in fights like that. It changes you." After we hung up, his words echoed in my mind. Was it changing me? I looked at the file on my screen, a meticulously organized portfolio of harassment. This was the work of the old Tom, the political operator. I had created a weapon. I still hoped I wouldn't have to use it. But the part of me that understood power knew that a weapon, once forged, rarely remains sheathed. The path to peace was becoming increasingly narrow, and I feared it might lead through a war I had no desire to fight. The campaign of fines and legalistic intimidation was like a siege, designed to wear us down and starve us of the will to fight. When it became clear that we were willing to absorb the financial cost, Barbara's strategy shifted to a more personal and insidious form of warfare. She began to engage in minor, deniable acts of sabotage, small incursions meant to inflict emotional and psychological damage, to make us feel unsafe in our own home. The first violation felt like a physical blow. Sarah had created a special display for her Facebook page, a beautiful, tiered stand on our porch, showcasing her new line of miniature fruit tarts. She'd spent the whole morning on it, arranging the tiny, glistening pastries, each a perfect little jewel of culinary art. She left them out for just a few minutes to get the best natural light for her photographs. When she went back out, the display was in ruins. Someone had taken a single, perfect bite out of each and every tart, leaving a trail of 20 mangled pastries. It was an act of such intimate, childish vandalism that it was deeply unsettling. There was no proof, no witness, just a lingering sense of violation. Sarah was heartbroken, not just at the loss of her work, but at the sheer malice of the act. I knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. Who was responsible? That evening, my moral reservations evaporated. The game had changed. This was no longer about rules. It was about protecting my wife from a campaign of targeted cruelty. The old Tom, the one who understood surveillance and countermoves, took over. I spent the next 2 days installing a state-of-the-art, discreet security system. These were not bulky, obvious cameras. They were tiny, sophisticated lenses, the kind used in sensitive corporate and government environments, hidden seamlessly within the architectural details of our porch. They fed not to a cloud server, but to a closed, encrypted local network. As I painstakingly threaded the wires, a wave of self-loathing washed over me. I had built a career on knowing what people did when they thought no one was watching. I had seen how that knowledge could be twisted and used. To bring that dark art to the doorstep of my own peaceful sanctuary felt like a profound failure. A concession that the world I had tried to escape had followed me home. It was a necessary evil, I told myself. But it felt evil, nonetheless. The cameras captured the mundane suburban ballet for a week. Mail carriers, dog walkers, the occasional delivery. Then, one night, my carefully programmed alert system pinged my phone. Motion detected at the side of the house at 2:17 a.m. I pulled up the live feed, my heart pounding. The infrared camera cast the world in an eerie, monochrome glow. A figure, clad in dark clothing, was crouched by our outdoor water spigot. It was Barbara. I watched, my jaw clenched, as she deliberately unscrewed the sprinkler head from its riser. Then, she took a small tube of what looked like superglue from her pocket and carefully squeezed it into the threads of the sprinkler before screwing it loosely back on. It was a subtle, clever act of sabotage. The next time the sprinkler system activated, that head would shoot off under the pressure, flooding the foundation and Sarah's carefully tended rose garden. It was deniable who could prove it wasn't just a faulty part, but the camera recorded it all in crystal-clear high definition. I saved the file, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and grim satisfaction. I now had irrefutable proof of her criminal activity. The strategist in me knew this was the silver bullet, the piece of leverage that could end the entire conflict. But the man I wanted to be, the husband who just wanted a quiet life, hesitated. Releasing this video would mean utter humiliation for her. It would be a public execution of her reputation. Did I have the right to do that? Was responding to her malice with my own calculated strike, making me just as bad as she was? I sat in the dark of my office for a long time, the ghostly image of her face on my screen. I was standing on a moral precipice. I could take the high road, absorb the attacks, and hope she would eventually tire herself out. Or I could use the tools of my old trade, the weapons I had sworn I would never touch again, to fight back. I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that my wife was no longer smiling when she baked, and the joy was slowly being poisoned. One malicious act at a time. The cost of inaction was becoming as morally fraught as the cost of retaliation. Having failed to deter us with fines and finding her direct acts of sabotage thwarted by an invisible defense, Barbara escalated her war to the court of public opinion. She wielded the Oakmont Hills Community Facebook page, a forum she ruled with the absolute power of a petty dictator, as her personal propaganda machine. Her objective was to turn us into social pariahs, to isolate us from our neighbors, and starve Sarah's bakery of the local support it needed to thrive. Her method was a masterclass in insidious suggestion. Each post, a carefully crafted piece of disinformation designed to prey on suburban anxieties. "Is anyone else concerned about the increase in unfamiliar cars in our neighborhood lately?" she wrote one evening. "I saw a strange van parked on the corner for almost 5 minutes, With a home-based business operating and attracting so much non-resident traffic, one has to worry about the security of our community. Vigilance. Protect Oakmont. The comments that followed were a predictable chorus of her loyalists, stoking the fires of paranoia. I've noticed it too. Barbara. It makes me nervous for the children. Thank you for being our watchdog. A few days later, she posted again, this time attacking Sarah's integrity. A friend of mine who works for the county mentioned something interesting. She wrote, "A classic rumor-monger's opening." She said that these cottage food businesses have much lower safety standards than commercial kitchens. They don't get the same rigorous surprise inspections. It's a bit frightening to think what might be going on behind closed doors. Food for thought. Safety first. This was a deliberate, malicious lie, designed to destroy Sarah's reputation. The public shaming had a chilling and immediate effect. The few remaining neighbors who had been friendly began to cross the street to avoid us. A mother from a few houses down, who had been ordering birthday cupcakes for her children, sent Sarah a curt message canceling her standing order. The sense of isolation was palpable. We were no longer new neighbors. We were a perceived threat. The emotional toll on Sarah was immense. Baking was an act of communion for her, a way of connecting with people. To have that passion twisted into something sinister, to be ostracized by the very community she had hoped to embrace, was chipping away at her spirit. I found her one afternoon, staring out the kitchen window, her apron untouched, her mixers silent. "Maybe she's right," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should just stop." That single, whispered sentence was the moment all my moral deliberations came to an end. My strategic patience, my wrestling with the ethics of retaliation. It all seemed like a self-indulgent luxury in the face of my wife's despair. Her dream was dying, and my inaction was letting it happen. That night, I sat in my office. The evidence I had compiled spread across my screen, the spreadsheet of fines, the legal analysis of the bylaws, the crystal-clear video of her vandalism. I had the means to destroy her. I could forward the video to the police and have her arrested for property damage. I could send it to the local news, which would delight in a story about a corrupt HOA president. I could post it on the community Facebook page myself and watch her digital kingdom burn. But as I considered these options, they felt wrong. They were the tactics of my old world, the scorched earth politics I had grown to despise. It would be a messy, public battle that would drag us even deeper into the mud. It would be a victory, but a brutish one. I had to find a different way, a move so unexpected and so definitive that it wouldn't just win the argument, but render the entire argument irrelevant. I thought back on my career, on the thousands of political battles I had witnessed and orchestrated. The most effective victories were never about brute force. They were about changing the narrative, about reframing the debate so completely that your opponent's position became untenable. Barbara's power was derived from her self-appointed role as the guardian of Oakmont Hills' standards, its exclusivity, its taste. To defeat her, I didn't need to prove she was a criminal. I needed to prove she had no taste. My phone rang. It was Marcus. We chatted for a few minutes about the latest news from D.C., and then he said something that made the tumblers of a new plan click into place in my mind. "By the way," he said, "the governor is in a bit of a bind. His executive chef, Dubois, is a genius, but he's a tyrant. He just fired their longtime pastry supplier a week before the First Lady's big charity luncheon. Now they're scrambling." An idea, so audacious and so perfect, it made my heart race. began to form. I knew Governor Whitman. I had run his first long-shot campaign, and we had formed a bond forged in the crucible of 16-hour days and impossible odds. He was a man who valued loyalty above all else. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I think I might have a solution for the governor's pastry problem, but I'm going to need a favor, and the timing has to be perfect." I was about to make a call I had sworn I would never make. I was about to leverage a relationship from my past to solve a problem in my present. My internal conflict was intense. Was this an abuse of power, the very thing I had come to disdain? Or was it simply using the tools at my disposal to protect my family when all other options had been exhausted? I looked at the dark screen of my wife's baking page, at the cruel comments from our neighbors, and the answer became clear. This wasn't an abuse of power. This was an act of defense, and it was time to end this. Barbara's campaign of attrition had reached its zenith. Having failed to break us with fines, vandalism, or slander, she deployed her ultimate weapon, the threat of a financially crippling lawsuit. The thick, intimidating packet from the HOA's law firm was a declaration of unconditional surrender, or total war. It was filled with manufactured evidence and baseless claims. From a bogus appraisal claiming we had lowered property values to a wild accusation that we were in violation of county zoning ordinances. It was designed to do one thing: terrify us into submission. It almost worked. Seeing Sarah's spirit finally break under the weight of it all, watching her offer to sacrifice her dream to save our home, was the catalyst that ended my internal debate. My hesitation, my moral wrestling, was a luxury I could no longer afford. She was threatening my wife's happiness and our family's security. The time for restraint was over. As Sarah wept in the living room, I retreated to my office, the cold fury in my chest solidifying into a clear, sharp-edged plan. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to a friendly neighbor down the street, a retired accountant named George, who despised Barbara's reign. I knew he was on the HOA's finance committee. I asked him to quietly let me know the moment Barbara scheduled the meeting to vote on the lawsuit. My second call was to Marcus. "It's time," I said, my voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Are you sure about this?" "Tom," he asked, his tone serious, "once you ring this bell, you can't unring it. You'll be back in the game, even for a moment." "She's threatening to sue us personally," I said, looking at the legal document on my desk. "She made my wife cry. I'm sure. The game's already come to me." I explained the situation in detail. I told him about the HOA, about Barbara's failed bistro, about the escalating harassment. Then I laid out my request. It was audacious. It relied on my personal history with Governor Michael Whitman, a history that went deeper than just professional politics. I had been with him when his father passed away in the middle of his first campaign. I had helped him write the eulogy. I had been the one to keep the press at bay while he mourned. He was a man who never forgot a debt of friendship. "He owes you more than this, Tom," Marcus said when I was done. "I'll talk to him directly. And I'll speak to Jean-Pierre. Dubois is a snob, but he worships the governor, and he knows a good political play when he sees one. Theatrics are his second language." 4 days later, George called. "She's done it. Tom. Emergency meeting scheduled for Tuesday night at 7. The only agenda item is the vote to sue you." The final piece was in place. I called Marcus back. "It's Tuesday at 7 o'clock. The clubhouse. She'll start with a 10-minute monologue to rally her troops. I need Chef Dubois to walk through the door at precisely 7:15. "Consider it done," Marcus said. "The governor sends his best. He said, "It's about time Tom reminded people who he is." The call felt like a betrayal of the new life I was trying to build, a regression to the man I had been. I sat in my silent office, the weight of that decision pressing down on me. I was pulling strings, leveraging power, orchestrating a public spectacle to crush a political opponent. The fact that my opponent was a suburban HOA president didn't change the fundamental nature of the act. But then, I heard the sound of Sarah in the kitchen, tentatively opening a bag of flour, the gentle whir of her mixer starting up. She was choosing to fight, to bake in the face of intimidation. And I knew, in that moment, that I would use any weapon, any connection, any tool at my disposal to defend her right to do so. My peace was inextricably tied to her joy, and I would go to war for it. The meeting room in the Oakmont Hills clubhouse felt like a courtroom prepared for a guilty verdict. The air was stale with self-righteousness. Barbara's loyalists were seated in the front rows, their faces grim and determined. We sat near the back, an island of tense defiance. Sarah's hand was cold in mine, but her chin was held high. She had insisted on coming, on facing her accuser. Barbara stood at the podium, in her element. She was dressed in a severe navy blue suit, the armor for her moment of triumph. She launched into a passionate, pre-rehearsed speech, a tapestry of half-truths and outright lies about protecting the community, preserving property values, and upholding the sanctity of their covenants. She painted herself as the reluctant hero, forced into this unpleasant action by our obstinate refusal to comply. "It is with a heavy heart," she said, her voice ringing with false gravitas, "that I must ask the board to authorize legal action. We have exhausted all other options. Now, before we call for the vote, are there any final statements?" Her eyes locked on me, a challenge gleaming within them. She expected me to plead, to argue, to make a scene. She was ready for it. What she was not ready for was the sound of the clubhouse doors swinging open. The timing was perfect. It was 7:15 p.m. A man strode into the room with an air of effortless authority. He wore the immaculate, double-breasted white uniform of a high-end executive chef, his tall toque hat adding to his impressive stature. The governor's official seal, embroidered in brilliant gold thread on his chest, seemed to catch every bit of light in the dreary room. It was Chef Jean-Pierre Dubois, and he looked like a king who had accidentally wandered into a peasant's hut. He surveyed the room, his expression one of polite bewilderment, and began to walk toward the podium. A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the audience. Barbara stared, her mouth slightly agape, her triumphant speech dying on her lips. "Excuse me," Chef Dubois said, his rich French accent cutting through the silence. "I am so very sorry for the intrusion. I am trying to locate the residence of a Mrs. Sarah Vance, the culinary artist behind the Gilded Spoon." A collective, audible gasp swept the room. Every head turned to stare at us. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with a confusion I had deliberately orchestrated. "Who are you?" Barbara managed to ask, her voice a thin, reedy version of its usual confident tone. "I am Jean-Pierre Dubois, executive chef to Governor Michael Whitman," he announced, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. His gaze found me in the back of the room, and a wide, genuine smile broke across his face. "Tom, it is wonderful to see you. My friend the governor told me I would find you here. He still speaks of that night during the 2018 debates, when the teleprompter failed and you fed him his lines through his earpiece for 20 minutes. He says you saved him. He sends his unwavering loyalty." The name-dropping, the specific anecdote of our shared history, It was all part of the plan, a clear signal to everyone in the room of a deep, personal connection that transcended mere politics. Chef Dubois then turned his considerable charm on my wife. "And you, Madame Vance, must be the genius. It is a true honor. The First Lady has not stopped talking about your lemon tarts since she tasted them at a private brunch last Sunday. She described them as bottled sunshine." Barbara looked as if she'd been physically struck. Her entire case was built on the premise that Sarah's bakery was a low-class nuisance. And now, the governor's personal chef was here, praising it in the most glowing terms imaginable. "The reason for my visit?" Dubois continued, his voice resonating with purpose, "is that the governor has insisted he was very firm. You know how he gets that? The Gilded Spoon be the sole provider of all desserts for the upcoming First Lady's charity luncheon. It is our most prestigious event of the year. The press, the donors, the national media, everyone will be there." He unfurled a long scroll of paper. "I have the preliminary order: 500 lemon tarts, 500 salted caramel macarons, and a custom cake of your design. The governor trusts your artistry completely. The theme," he said, "should be celebrating the best of our state. And Mrs. Vance, he believes you are the best." He beamed at Sarah, who was now looking at me, her expression a beautiful, dawning mixture of shock, understanding, and love. I finally rose from my seat. The room so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I walked slowly to the front and stood before the podium, looking directly at Barbara. Her face was a ruin, her carefully constructed authority demolished. "Barbara," I said, my voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of finality, "it appears my wife has a rather important and high-profile order to fill. For the governor, given the circumstances, and the potential for some awkward press coverage, should the Gilded Spoon be hindered in any way, I move that we table the vote on your lawsuit indefinitely." She stared at me, speechless. Her weapon, the lawsuit. The community's support. Her own reputation had not just been neutralized. It had been turned against her in a public spectacle of such overwhelming force that she would never recover. The war was over. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was a quiet, swift, and total rout. The motion to sue us was, of course, dead on arrival. In the stunned silence that followed my statement, a motion was made from the floor by George, the retired accountant, to adjourn. It passed almost unanimously. Barbara was left standing alone at the podium, a general without an army. Her authority evaporated. The story of the meeting, of the dramatic arrival of the governor's chef, and the subsequent humiliation of the HOA president, spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. It was a perfect piece of political theater, and it completely reframed the narrative. We were no longer the rule-breaking pariahs. We were local heroes. Artisans celebrated at the highest level of state government. Barbara was no longer the righteous protector of the community. She was the petty, jealous villain who had almost chased away a state treasure. Her downfall was absolute. An internal audit, spearheaded by George and several other newly emboldened residents, revealed a pattern of financial mismanagement and the misuse of HOA funds for her personal vendettas, including the exorbitant retainer for the law firm. Faced with public disgrace and potential legal action from the HOA itself, she and her husband sold their house in a matter of weeks and moved away, vanishing from Oakmont Hills without a word. With Barbara's reign of terror at an end, a palpable sense of relief and renewal settled over the community. The HOA was reformed, its labyrinthine rulebook shredded and replaced with a simple charter based on common sense and mutual respect. Our neighbors, once distant and suspicious, were now warm and effusively friendly, many of them stopping by with apologies and eager to be placed on the now legendary waiting list for Sarah's pastries. The Gilded Spoon, as expected, became a phenomenon. The media coverage of the First Lady's luncheon was a triumph. Sarah was hailed as a rising star in the state's culinary scene. The orders poured in, and we had to hire a small staff to help manage the demand. But through it all, we held fast to the original dream. We kept the business in our home, turning down lucrative offers to open a commercial bakery. The magic, Sarah always said, was in the kitchen where it all began. I found the peace I had been searching for, but in a way I never expected. I had learned that a quiet life is not something you can simply purchase. Sometimes it must be fought for. I had been forced to dip back into the world of strategy and power I had tried to leave behind, but I had done so not for ambition or ego, but for love. And in doing so, I had found a sense of closure. Now, on quiet evenings, I sit on our porch, the air filled with the sweet scent of my wife's creations, a scent of happiness and hard-won peace. I watch as neighbors stroll by, waving and calling out friendly greetings. Our home is no longer a fortress. It is a beacon. And I have finally, truly, left the old game behind. Content in my new role as the proud husband of the best baker in the state.